You cannot be serious. Grandmother. Samuel Royce's voice was ice beneath velvet, calm and deadly. Across the polished mahogany dining table, Margaret Royce did not flinch. Her silver curls framed sharp eyes that had seen empires built and burned. The will is clear, she stated. If you are not married by your 35th birthday, you relinquish all voting rights within Royce Holdings. Your father's stipulation, not mine. Samuel's jaw tightened. He died 7 years ago. I've rebuilt this company alone. You are brilliant, Margaret said, her tone almost soft. But brilliance does not build legacies. Families do. The room went still. Dozens of cousins, board members in designer suits and second wives, holding champagne flutes, tried to appear invisible. Samuel stood, his chair scraping against the marble floor. Excuse me. Without waiting for acknowledgement, he strode from the dining room. He moved past servers in tuxedos and a string quartet playing near the balcony. He turned a corner too sharply and nearly collided with a janitor, crouched beside a cleaning cart. Watch it, Samuel snapped, then stopped. Angela, she looked up, startled. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few strands escaping around her flushed face. Her uniform was neat but plain, and she held a spray bottle in one gloved hand. I'm sorry, she said, automatically starting to move aside. Samuel narrowed his eyes. You are not supposed to be on this floor. During events, Angela bristled. Someone spilled champagne down the hallway. I was told to clean it. His temper, already frayed, sparked. Do you always talk back to executives? She stood up, short, but unyielding. Do you always explode at people doing their job? Samuel stared at her. There was something infuriatingly calm in her gaze. No fear, no flattery, just exhaustion and honesty. He scoffed. You wouldn't last a minute in my world. Angela crossed her arms. And you wouldn't last a day in mine. Something dangerous curled in Samuel's chest. He took a step closer. If you were my wife, you'd understand why I am this way. Angela rolled her eyes. If I were your wife, I'd probably have set your suit on fire by now. He blinked. Then suddenly, recklessly, Samuel said, do it. Angela frowned. What? Be my wife. Pretend to be. 6 months. We get married, convince my family. It's real, then you disappear. You get paid. I keep my company. Simple. She stared at him, then burst out laughing. Oh my God, you're serious. He nodded once. Completely. Angela shook her head, incredulous. Why me? Why not one of your model cool friends or a struggling actress? Because they would expect something in return, he said. You clearly despise me. It keeps things clean. Angela's expression shifted just slightly. This is insane. Samuel pulled out his phone, tapped quickly, and showed her a number on the screen. Angela stared at it. Her hand trembled slightly. That covers your mother's hospital bills, he said quietly, and puts your brother through 4 years of college, he added. Her face went still. No intimacy, no real commitment. Just play the part for 6 months. Angela glanced down the hallway, then back at him. And after 6 months, we divorce. You vanish. Your family debt-free. I keep the company. No one gets hurt. Angela looked at him, and for the first time, Samuel felt unsure. Then she exhaled slowly. Fine, I'll do it. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Just like that? No, she replied. Not just like that. But people like me don't get fairy tale endings. We get contracts. I'll read the fine print, he smirked. You'll find my terms are fair. Angela picked up her cleaning cloth and walked away. Over her shoulder she called, Try not to be insufferable during our fake honeymoon. Samuel watched her go, the faintest trace of a smile playing at his lips. He had no idea he had just invited a hurricane into his meticulously ordered life. Angela stood at the threshold of the Royce estate, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Her eyes were wide as they scanned the sweeping marble steps, the perfectly manicured hedges, and the butler who opened the door without a single word. Inside, everything gleamed. It was too polished, too cold. Crystal chandeliers hung like icicles above floors that reflected her unsure steps. It felt less like a home and more like a museum that whispered, "You do not belong here." Samuel walked, 2 steps ahead, his suit flawless, his posture straight as a blade. "You'll be staying in the east wing," he said curtly, barely, glancing at her. "Your room connects to mine, but we'll keep separate spaces. I trust you can remember your part." Angela gave a dry laugh. "You mean remember I'm not really your wife?" He stopped and turned. His voice was calm, clipped. "Exactly. This is a contract, a performance. Do not confuse kindness for anything more." The staff had been briefed. A private wedding had supposedly taken place overseas. The new Mrs. Royce was to be respected, accommodated, and given anything she requested. Angela requested very little. She spent the first few days trying not to break anything. She practiced walking in heels on the plush carpets. She Googled how to use 14 different forks. She sat with the etiquette coach Samuel hired, repeating words like darling and investment, portfolio until they no longer made her gag. But what she could not fake was poise. At dinners, her napkin slipped into her lap too late. She sipped from the wrong glass, and once she accidentally called a truffle a fancy mushroom. Samuel, seated beside her, did not scold her publicly, but she could feel his tension. The way he shifted his jaw or tightened his grip on his wine glass spoke volumes. "Try not to embarrass yourself next time," he said that evening, his voice low as they walked through the hall. Angela smirked. "I thought I was here to embarrass your family, not myself." He did not laugh. One morning, before a brunch event with shareholders, Samuel found her trying to decide between 3 dresses. Her eyes darted between the mirrors, her hands trembling slightly. "You look fine," he said, dismissively. "Just don't speak unless spoken to." Angela turned sharply. "You know, pretending to love someone is easier when they're not treating you like a misbehaving dog." He raised a brow. "Then, behave." She chose a deep blue dress. Elegant, understated. The shareholder smiled politely. Samuel played the doting husband. He pulled out her chair, placed a gentle hand on her back even, poured her champagne with a whisper at her ear that made the other women lean in with envy. But later in the car, as soon as the driver's window rolled up, he pulled his hand away from hers. "No need for theatrics now," muttered. Angela looked at him, her eyes unreadable. "You're right. This whole thing is just a performance." She turned away and stared out the window, but he caught the flicker of something in her expression. Something soft, something bruised. One night, unable to sleep, Angela wandered the silent halls. She ended up in the kitchen, barefoot, making a cup of tea. Outside, near the front gate, she saw one of the security guards slumped over in his chair, clearly asleep on a cold, still night. She pulled a thick throw blanket from the sofa, tiptoed outside, and gently laid it over his shoulders. He stirred, mumbling, "Thanks." Angela just smiled and walked back, inside. What she didn't know was that Samuel had seen everything from the shadows of the upstairs landing. He said nothing, but he watched her for a long time afterward. He felt something tight in his chest that he refused to name. At another family gathering, Angela laughed a little too loud. She complimented the wrong cousin's wife. She called Samuel Sam and then tried to play it off as a pet name. Samuel clenched his jaw but smiled for the room. Later, when they were alone on the garden terrace, he stepped away from her, his voice harsh. "Don't improvise. Stick to the script." Angela folded her arms. "Then maybe write me a better part." They stood in silence, the moonlight casting long shadows between them, neither one willing to admit how blurred the lines were beginning to feel. The sun filtered through the glass ceiling of the Royce Conservatory, casting golden flecks over porcelain teacups and delicately arranged pastries. Angela sat across from Margaret Royce, the formidable matriarch of the family. Her back was straight, her hand folded neatly in her lap. The tea was still steaming, but her nerves were not. Margaret lifted her teacup with a grace honed over decades of being the most commanding presence in any room. her eyes sharp beneath soft silver hair, watched Angela with quiet scrutiny. No smile, not yet, only the sound of a spoon clinking against china. Angela offered a polite nod, unsure whether she should reach for the sugar cubes or keep her hands perfectly still. The tension was brittle, but she was used to being underestimated. What she was not used to was the weight of judgment from someone whose approval suddenly mattered more than she'd anticipated. How long have you and Samuel known each other? Margaret finally asked, her voice calm but edged. Angela cleared her throat. About 6 months. Margaret's gaze didn't falter. That is not very long. No, ma'am, Angela replied quietly. But time doesn't always measure connection. The older woman studied her for a moment, longer before pouring tea into a cup for Angela. Cream, sugar? Just a bit of cream, thank you. They drank quietly, the rustle of wine through the garden outside, filling the gaps in conversation. Angela found herself staring at the books on a nearby shelf, rows of leather-bound classics, each one pristine. Do you enjoy reading? Margaret asked, following her gaze. Yes, Angela replied. When I can. Mostly poetry. My mother loved it, Margaret nodded. A woman of verse is rarely lost for meaning. Angela smiled, faintly. My mother used to say, poetry was the only way to tell the truth without shouting. That made Margaret pause. Something shifted in her expression, a softness breaking through the stoic facade. She set her cup down. You remind me of someone, she said slowly. My sister. Strong when she had every reason not to be. Tell me, Angela, do you truly love my grandson? Angela's breath caught. Her eyes dropped to the tablecloth, fingers tightening. She hesitated, then met Margaret's eyes. I want to do what's right for him, for you, for all of this. Margaret tilted, her head considering. That is not the answer I expected. I didn't expect to be sitting here, Angela said with a nervous laugh. To her surprise, Margaret smiled, genuinely this time. Perhaps that's a good thing. From that day forward, something between them shifted. Margaret began inviting Angela to accompany her on errands, florist, runs, bookstore visits, even afternoon walks around the gardens. Samuel noticed. One morning, he returned from a board meeting and saw them in the greenhouse. Angela was crouched beside a potted orchid, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Margaret stood behind her gently, pointing out a leaf with browning edges. They were laughing genuinely, unrestrainedly. Samuel stood by the doorway, unseen, watching with an unreadable expression. He could not remember the last time he had heard his grandmother laugh like that. Later that evening he passed Margaret in the hallway. She paused, looking up at him with her familiar steel gaze. She has a kind heart, Margaret said without prompting. Samuel offered a tight smile. She plays the role well. She is not playing, Margaret said sharply. But you are. And you're not very good at it. Samuel flinched but said nothing. That night, Angela knocked lightly on Samuel's study door. He looked up, a pen in hand, clearly not expecting her. Your grandmother invited me to the art exhibit tomorrow, she said. Apparently it's a Royce family tradition. He nodded, hiding his surprise. She hasn't invited anyone in years, Angela hesitated. I think she knows. Samuel looked up. And knows what? That this isn't real, but maybe she wishes it were. He didn't reply, just looked at her for a long moment. Something in his chest tightened, but as always, he buried it. Be ready by 10, he said, his eyes returning to his paperwork. Angela turned and left, but not before he noticed the slightest dip in her shoulders. And once again, Samuel stood alone, in a house full of everything, except the one thing he was starting to miss the most. The evening buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses. String lights flickered across the rooftop terrace of Royce Enterprises, casting a warm glow over the city skyline. Angela stood near the refreshments table, laughing lightly at something a junior executive had just whispered to her. Something about the punch tasting more like an old sock than sangria. She was dressed simply but beautifully. The navy dress fit her like a second skin, modest yet undeniably flattering. Her hair, pulled back with soft curls framing her face, danced with the breeze. She was radiant, effortlessly so. Across the room, Samuel's eyes hadn't left her. He watched as Angela nodded at the man beside her, listened intently, and then laughed again, bright and easy. The young man leaned in slightly. Little too close. His hand brushed Angela's arm. Something flared in Samuel's chest. A hot, possessive feeling he didn't recognize. Without thinking, he moved. Angela looked up, startled, as Samuel stepped between them. His expression was unreadable, his voice clipped but controlled. "Excuse us. I need to speak with my wife." The other man blinked, nodded politely, and backed away. Angela glanced between them, confusion flickering across her features. Samuel led her toward a quieter corner of the terrace near the potted ferns. Once there, he let go of her wrist, but did not step back. "What was that about?" she asked, brow raised. Samuel exhaled sharply. He was being too familiar. Angela folded her arms. He was being nice. That's all. It didn't look like just nice. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you jealous?" His gaze snapped to hers. "Of course not. I just want everything to appear appropriate. We have a deal, remember? We play the part, but we do not invite scrutiny." Angela tilted her head. "You mean I shouldn't enjoy myself? Unless you're the one I'm talking to." Samuel frowned. "That's not what I said, but it's what you meant." There was a beat of silence. Then Angela stepped back, shaking her head with a sigh. "I'm not trying to embarrass you, Samuel. I'm just trying to survive this circus without losing who I am." Didn't reply. She walked away. Later that night, the house was quiet. The staff had mostly gone home, save for a few in the kitchen, cleaning up. Angela stood at the stove in a borrowed robe, her hair damp from a quick shower. She was stirring a small pot of soup, humming under her breath. Samuel, still in his button-down shirt with the top two buttons undone, wandered into the kitchen, rubbing the back of his neck. "What are you doing?" he asked. Angela looked over her shoulder. "Couldn't sleep. Got hungry. Figured I'd make something simple." He hesitated in the doorway. You cook?" She smiled. "When I can. Afford ingredients? Yes." Samuel chuckled unexpectedly. "Need a taste tester?" She handed him a spoon. He tried the soup and nodded. "It's good. Needs salt." Angela rolled her eyes. "Of course you'd say that." She reached for the shaker and tapped in a bit more, then handed him another spoonful. He took it again. Perfect. They sat on opposite ends of the kitchen island, each with a bowl of soup in front of them. As they ate, a housekeeper walked by and commented on the smell, asking for the recipe. Angela giggled and promised to write it down. Samuel watched her laugh, watched how she leaned into conversations, without calculation how easily she gave pieces of herself to others. And for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, he laughed with her. Really laughed. Not the practiced chuckle he used at business events, but something real, something warm. Angela caught the look in his eyes, and for a moment, everything softened between them. No pretense, no script. Just soup, laughter, and a flicker of something neither of them dared to name. The gala was everything Angela had feared and more. Held at the Royce family's private estate, it was a grand, glittering affair. There were floor-length gowns, champagne towers, and a symphony of polite arrogance humming beneath every conversation. Angela stood beside Samuel, dressed impeccably in a borrowed silver gown, her hair pinned into soft waves. She smiled when she needed to, nodded when prompted, and kept her trembling hands carefully folded in front of her. Beside her, Samuel played his part perfectly. Poised, confident, attentive, just enough to convince others, but never fully looking at her. His eyes scanned the room like a man checking boxes, not like someone introducing the love of his life. Not like someone who felt anything at all. Angela already felt like she was fading. The night wore on. They moved from group to group, from conversation to conversation. She was praised for her poise, complimented on her dress, and interrogated politely about how she and Samuel met. she answered carefully, always, remembering what they rehearsed, always playing the role. Then came the moment she would never forget. A distant cousin of Samuel's, Clarissa Royce, approached with a predatory smile. Clarissa was elegance sharpened into a weapon, dressed in emerald, silk and dripping with diamonds. "Well, if it isn't the mysterious fiancé," she purred. "Angela, right?" Angela nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, lovely to meet you." Clarissa looked her up and down, slowly, then turned to the circle of nearby guests. "You know, I have to hand it to Samuel. He always did know how to keep us on our toes." Polite laughter rippled through the group. Clarissa turned back to her. "Tell me, Angela, what does one wear to clean a marble floor? I mean, it must be exhausting keeping all that grime from sticking." The laughter faltered. Angela's smile slipped, but she said nothing. Clarissa continued as if discussing the weather. "I suppose it's a step up, though, from janitor to Royce bride. You must be very adaptable." Angela's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at Samuel. He was standing right there. He had heard every single word, but he said nothing. Not one word. Not to defend her, not to stop Clarissa, not even to look at her. He just stood there, his face a mask of indifference. Angela took a slow, steadying breath. Then she turned, gently set her untouched champagne glass on a nearby tray and walked out of the room. She did not run. She did not cry. Not yet. She walked with a dignity they didn't deserve. She passed the valet without stopping, past the gurgling fountains, the perfect hedges, and the long stretch of gravel driveway. She walked until the sound of music and laughter faded completely behind her. And still Samuel did not come. It was nearly midnight when he returned to the mansion, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. She was gone. The guest room she had used was stripped of her things. No suitcase, no shoes, no trace of her. Except for one item. On his bed, where his own pillows lay, was a single handwritten letter in familiar cursive. The paper smelled faintly of lavender. It was from his grandmother. He picked it up, his hands shaking, as he unfolded it. "Samuel," it began, "I have lived long enough to recognize the look of a man fighting himself. I have seen it in your grandfather. I have seen it in you. You brought that girl into this house for a lie, but she brought something true into it. Tonight, you stood still when the world asked you to step forward. You looked away when you should have looked her in the eyes. And you let someone who has never earned the right to speak for our family insult someone who had done nothing but try. You say this is pretend? A contract. But I saw you watching her when she laughed in the kitchen, when she read in the garden, when she covered the guard with a blanket. I saw the way your face softened. You may not have realized it, but your heart did. You do not have to marry her. You do not owe her anything. But do not lie to yourself that you feel nothing. You cannot build a life on control alone. Sooner or later, you will need someone who makes you feel and not just think. She made you feel, Samuel, and you let her walk away. So now, you must decide. Will you chase what is real or let it disappear for good? Grandma. Samuel sat on the edge of the bed, the letter in his lap, his breath heavy. He remembered her hand in his, earlier that evening, warm, uncertain, trusting, and he remembered letting it go. The pain in his chest grew sharp, an ache he couldn't ignore. For the first time in a long while, Samuel Royce did not feel in control. He just felt lost. And in that hollow silence, truth became impossible to deny. The woman he hired to pretend had somehow become the only person who ever made him wish it were real. Rain pounded the city in sheets, washing over sidewalks and soaking through the coat Samuel had thrown on without thinking. He stood outside the rusted gate of a narrow apartment building, unmoving as water streamed from his hair down into his eyes. He had not knocked yet. The windows above were dim, save for a warm light glowing faintly on the third floor, Angela's brother's apartment. He had remembered her mentioning it once quietly during a casual breakfast. He hadn't known he had memorized it until this very moment. Behind him, the world carried on honking cars, flashing Headlights, hurried umbrellas. But for Samuel, time stood still. Inside, behind that door, was the woman who had agreed to pretend to love him. And somewhere along the way, he had stopped pretending and then let her go. Earlier that day, he had found his grandmother waiting in the conservatory. No book in her hand, no teacup, just silence and her steady gaze. "She's gone," he had said quietly. "I know," Margaret replied. Never meant for her to get hurt. Margaret had nodded. "But you did, Samuel. Because pretending not to care is still a choice." He sat beside her, his head low. "You do not chase people, Samuel. Not friends, not lovers, not even family. You assume they will stay," her voice softened. "But people are not contracts. They do not renew themselves." He had not spoken. He had not needed to. Margaret placed a hand over his. "Go. Not to fix what you broke, but to face what you feel. She deserves that much. And so do you." Now he was here, at the edge of whatever came next. A door creaked open above him. Soft footsteps. The buzz of the front lock. Angela appeared in the doorway. She wore a faded hoodie and sweatpants, her hair damp at the ends. She looked like she had been crying and trying not to. When she saw him, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Samuel?" He did not move. She stepped forward. "You're soaked. What are you—" "I told you not, to love me," he said suddenly, the words hanging between them in the rain-soaked air. Angela blinked. "I told you not to fall for me. I said it every day. I made sure to remind you." His voice cracked. "Because I was afraid. Afraid I would be the one to break. The rules first," Angela said. "Nothing," her breath trembling. Samuel took a step closer, rain splashing off his jacket. "I was raised to control everything, to calculate risks. But you made me feel, and I didn't know how to handle that." He lowered his eyes. "So I stayed cold. I pretended it was just a game." He looked up again, his gaze desperate and raw. "But it wasn't." Angela swallowed hard. "Then why didn't you stop her at the party?" "Because I froze," he admitted, the shame clear in his voice. "Because a part of me, the cold, calculating part, thought I didn't deserve to fight for you." She crossed her arms, hugging herself against the cold and the confession. Her voice was soft. "And now? Now? I don't care if I deserve it." He stepped closer again, his voice low and urgent. "I just care that you're not beside me. That I wake up and the kitchen is quiet. That the house feels too big. That I miss your voice when you're reading to Grandma. That I miss watching you laugh at your own bad jokes." Angela bit her lip, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "I didn't come here to beg," he said. "I came to tell you the truth." A long silence settled between them, broken only by the falling rain. Then, slowly, Angela stepped back into the hallway. She opened the door wider, an unspoken invitation. Samuel hesitated for only a second, then stepped inside. Not into a contract, not into a performance, but into something real. Finally, the morning light slipped gently through the tall kitchen windows, casting a golden hue over the polished marble counters. For the first time in months, the air in the Royce estate was filled, not with silence, but with the warm clatter of breakfast being prepared. Together, Angela stood barefoot near the stove, flipping pancakes while humming softly. Samuel stood beside her, sleeve rolled up, focused on chopping strawberries. A streak of flour dusted his jaw, and Angela giggled, reaching out to wipe it away with her thumb. Margaret Royce sat at the head of the table, her silver hair neatly combed, her favorite porcelain teacup steaming in front of her. She watched the scene unfold with eyes that had seen decades of ambition and formality, but rarely this kind of simple, beautiful ease. "So," she said, breaking the peaceful moment with a playful glint in her eye, "should I be expecting wedding invitations before my next birthday?" Angela blushed, nearly dropping her spatula. Samuel gave a small smile, not looking up from his task. "That depends," he said. "Will you walk Angela down the aisle?" Margaret raised a brow. "Only if I get to pick the flowers." The three of them laughed, a sound that no longer felt out of place in the grand old house. There were no bodyguards outside the door, no housekeepers watching from the hallway. Just the hum of real life, happening softly. Later that day, Samuel walked into the conference room of Royce Industries with Angela by his side. The board of directors, all dressed in sleek suits and skeptical expressions, looked up as he entered. "I'll keep this brief," Samuel began, placing both hands on the gleaming table. "There have been a lot of questions about my personal life, about whether I'm ready to lead, whether I can commit." Angela stood slightly behind him, her hands clasped, unsure of her place in this world of his. Samuel turned to her, then reached for her hand and brought her to his side, their fingers lacing together. "This is Angela," he said, his voice steady and proud. "And she is no longer my pretend anything. She's my fiancée, and she has taught me more about loyalty, honesty, and strength than any business deal ever could." A few murmurs rippled through the room, but Margaret, seated at the far end, simply sipped her tea and nodded once, a silent, powerful seal of approval. Outside the building, as they walked to the car, Angela let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was a lot. Samuel squeezed her hand. "You were perfect," she smiled. "I still can't believe I used to scrub the corners of this lobby." He stopped, walking, and turned to face her, his expression serious and tender. "I believe it," he said softly, "because you're the same woman who scrubbed the corners of my heart when I didn't even realize how much dust had gathered there." Angela stared at him, her eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears. "You didn't change," he continued. "You just showed me what love looked like when it wasn't tied to expectations or power. When it was just given." She wrapped her arms around him, tightly, burying her face in his chest, and he held her as if he'd never let go. He kissed the top of her head. "Don't want a life where you're pretending to belong. I want a life where you're simply home." They drove back in silence, their fingers intertwined. The world outside buzzed with noise and ambition, but inside the car, there was only peace. That evening they found themselves back in the kitchen, cooking again. This time it was not out of necessity or performance, but out of a comfortable growing habit. Samuel made his now signature eggs. Angela poured the juice, and Margaret requested a second helping of pancakes. The table was messy. The conversation was unfiltered. The laughter was loud. It was not the life Samuel Royce had planned, but it was the one he had chosen. And for the first time in his carefully constructed world, he didn't feel like he was performing. He felt loved. He felt real. He felt home. The garden behind the Royce estate had never looked so alive. Rows of white hydrangeas bloomed under the soft blush of the afternoon sun. Lavender lined the stone path, leading to a wooden arch wrapped in ivy and pale gold ribbon. There were no marble aisles, no grand orchestra, no hovering paparazzi. Just family, a few close friends, and the sound of birdsong mingling with quiet laughter. Angela stood in front of the mirror. Inside the house, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the delicate lace sleeves of her dress. It was simple, nothing like the gown she had seen in magazines, but it felt like her. Honest, earned, real. Margaret entered the room quietly, holding a small satin box. "For you," she said, placing it in Angela's hands. Inside was a single silver hairpin, elegant and old, with a single, brilliant sapphire at its center. "It belonged to my mother," Margaret said softly. "She gave it to me when I married, and I want you to have it now." Angela's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say." Margaret smiled, a deep, knowing smile. "Just promise me you'll love him, especially on the days he forgets how to love himself." Angela nodded, the tears now threatening to fall. "I promise." Outside, Samuel stood beneath the arch, dressed in a sharp dark blue suit, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. For a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, his legs now felt profoundly unsteady. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from something gentler, something he used to call weakness, but now knew was his greatest strength. vulnerability. The soft chords of a single violin began to play. Angela stepped into view at the far end of the path. Time stopped. Samuel forgot to breathe. She walked slowly, every step deliberate, her eyes never leaving his. And when she reached him, he whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "I should have invited you into my life much sooner." Angela smiled, her own eyes shining. "You did. You just didn't know it yet." Margaret stood between them, officiating not with long legal speeches, but with simple wisdom. "Love," she said, her voice carrying on the gentle breeze, "is not a deal to be made or a role to perform. It is a choice made every single day to see the flaws, the fears and the fractures, and still choose each other." They exchanged vows, words neither had rehearsed but had carried in their hearts for months. "I hired you to play a part," Samuel said quietly, his voice thick with emotion as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "But I fell in love with the woman who lived inside that role. The real you. The only you." Angela's hand shook as she returned the gesture. "I thought I was just surviving," she whispered, "until you looked at me like I belonged. And now I never want to go back to the days before that look." Margaret declared them husband and wife. And as they kissed, a kiss that was gentle, certain, and whole, their small crowd of loved ones erupted in heartfelt applause. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and golden light bathed the garden, Samuel and Angela danced barefoot on the cool grass. The scent of lavender and roses hung in the air, and laughter echoed from the porch where their family celebrated. Samuel pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Still think this was a ridiculous idea?" he murmured. Angela laughed softly, a sound he now cherished more than any stock market gain. "Yes. The most ridiculous way to find the truest thing I've ever known." He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers, finally seeing his entire future reflected there. "Me too." If this story touched your heart and reminded you that sometimes love comes in the most unexpected disguises, we invite you to stay with us for more soul-stirring tales just like this one. Here at Soul Stirring Stories, we believe in the quiet strength of love, the beauty of second chances, and the magic that happens when two hearts decide to heal together. If you believe in those things too, please show your support by liking this video. Leave us a comment sharing your favorite moment from Samuel and Angela's journey. And most importantly, subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories and click the notification bell for more tales of true love, true heart, and true hope. Thank you for watching, and remember, even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most unforgettable endings.